the NDP wants us to believe that this is all about oil prices. If that's true, then how come there's an unprecedented oil and gas boom going on south of the border? All of this is the consequence of the NDP raising taxes on everything.
I will keep diversifying our economy, investing in upgrading and refining right here at home. And I will win the pipeline fight, not by shouting at our fellow Canadians, but by continuing to build support.
Tomorrow, back here in Alberta, polls will open for an election that has centered around, in large part, the province's struggling oil and gas industry. The NDP's Rachel Notley, as you just heard, says she wants to diversify the economy and break its boom and bust cycle. United Conservative Party leader Jason Kenney is promising to scrap the carbon tax, and remove the cap on oil sands emissions. So which road is better for Alberta? Richard Masson is an executive fellow at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy. He worked with the Alberta government for 17 years and another 14 in the oil and gas sector. Chris Bloomer, sitting next to him, is the president and CEO of the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, an organization that represents Canada's oil and gas transmission pipeline companies. He joins me. They both join me from Calgary. Pleasure to see you both. Thank you for your time today. Mr. Masson, I'm going to start with you, because we have a lot of viewers here who don't live in Alberta, who aren't necessarily familiar with all that's transpired in the oil patch. Can you paint us sort of a picture? What is the state of the province's oil sector right now as it stands?
It's in tough shape. So we have had not enough pipelines to get all of our oil to market. So as some of the big oil sands projects that were under construction for 3 or 4 years were completed and started to ramp up, we couldn't get our oil to market. We ended up with very low prices last year. That led the Alberta government to cutting back production, curtailing production. And so we've had reduced production, bad prices, and it's really put a chill on investment. So there's been no equities or debt offered to the oil patch for quite some time. A much lower, a 75% decline, in fact, last year compared to the year before. So it's a very tough situation for companies because they don't have the cash flow they'd like, and they can't raise debt and equity to keep themselves afloat.
Aside from companies, Mr. Masson, what has it meant for the average Albertan, for example, for jobs?
Well, there's far fewer rigs drilling. There's lots less of supply chain for the construction projects. It used to be that we were getting $25 billion a year of investment, primarily aimed at the oil sands. That's dropped way down to the kind of $10 or $12 billion a year range. That represents thousands and thousands of jobs, and jobs all across the country in the supply chain. So, folks that were flying out here to work aren't doing that anymore. Just ripple effects all over the economy. A third of the office space in downtown Calgary is empty, and in part because of this.
Mr. Bloomer, I see you nodding. I know in your capacity and the role that you hold right now, the focus has, of course, been on pipeline capacity. What role specifically, there's been a big debate in this election, what should the province be doing to increase that capacity? What role do you see for the government, sort of just the government, forget about which party's in there, but what role do you see for the provincial government in increasing that capacity?
Well, to increase capacity, we've got to get some pipelines under construction and moving forward. We have a couple, Line 3, and we have KXL. We need Trans Mountain. The cards are really stacked over on the federal side, though. They have the power to move these projects forward. The province can do some things, but it's really in the federal jurisdiction to move these projects forward and to assert their jurisdiction to get these pipelines built.
So, Mr. Masson, what does that mean for the debate that's occurred during this election? What's your feeling on what role the province can or should be playing in trying to get, for example, specifically even TMX built? Because the debate is around whether it's working with the feds, whether it's fighting the feds, whether, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think part of what we need to do is make sure that we're doing everything we can to be good environmental stewards. There's a segment of the population that's going to be very swayed by whether they see us doing the right thing. Alberta has been doing the right thing for a long time. We have good environmental policies. We were one of the first jurisdictions in North America to have a carbon tax under both parties that will continue for large industrial emitters. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to do in Alberta to be environmentally friendly that would help sell the pipeline in BC. I think the other important point is to help people in BC understand that the pipeline is in their interest. Their gasoline prices are very high right now, in part because they get a lot of fuel from Alberta and also from the Northwest, the refineries in Washington State. And so they have a very limited supply. Having that second pipeline will add more capacity to bring refined products to the lower mainland and help keep their gas prices reasonable. So we need each other. They need us as a supplier. We need them as a port. I think we should find a way to make this work.
Mr. Bloomer, why do you think that message has not necessarily resonated everywhere it needs to?
Well,
if you believe it needs to.
Well, I think it does. It is a Canadian issue. It's not just an Alberta issue. Let's be clear on that. And getting these resources developed and getting them to market, especially access to different markets from the U.S., it's night and day different between Canada and the U.S. in terms of how they're developing and moving their infrastructure projects forward. You know, in our recent E&Y report, we highlighted that over the past, since 2015, the U.S. has moved forward and authorized and built 15 new pipelines equivalent to the Section 52, which are bigger pipelines, and Canada has done one. So we have fallen way behind in our ability to develop our infrastructure and to get our resources to new markets.
Mr. Masson, I have about just over a minute left, but let me ask you for a bit of a statement on that, because we heard off the clips off the top of this segment, Jason Kenney and Rachel Notley sort of competing vision for that. And one of the claims made was that this isn't just about oil prices and the domino effect that those have, that there were policies that were enacted here that made it so that Canada was at a disadvantage compared to exactly what Mr. Bloomer was talking about in the U.S. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence to say it's true. I mean, U.S. production has grown by more than 2 million barrels a day in just the last year alone. And so production is growing in the U.S. and other places in the world, and it really hasn't been growing as much in Canada. The investment is really shut down going forward. So we need to find a way to keep our resource industry competitive. The world needs our energy. We can produce it responsibly. We need to look at the policies, whether it's climate levies or carbon taxes or regulation, that we can make ourselves competitive and efficient so that we can attract the investment we need to grow our resources.
All right, thank you very much, both of you, for your insight this evening. I really appreciate it. Thanks to Richard Masson and Chris Bloomer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sebastian.